Hey, Tristan Chifo here. I wanted to share a fresh perspective on why I think it's so important to offer your children, as a parent, a framework for seeing themselves, their identity, their relationship with one another, the relationship with you, and the relationship with the whole world through the lens of a loving God and of a divine family they're part of. Now, I'm mindful that many people these days are antagonistic towards, or at least agnostic towards, the idea of a God. Potentially male, if not divinely male and female, source of all life, giver of all things, creator of good and evil. There's a lot of hang-ups that people have about who God would be if he exists, if they exist. And whether you've been raised in a Christian family or in a Muslim or different faith family, you'll have your own conception of God, partly informed by what was taught to you in theory, and largely informed by, I would suggest, how your mum and how your dad or your caregivers acted towards you, because ultimately they demonstrated the template of what God would be. If there was a giver of life, if there was a father, a source to all things created, then they would, in the mind of a child, look exactly like the makers of me, my mum and my dad, right? Of course, that's how we see God. It's also, of course, how we project our conception of the divine and the religious. And we've, as a society, in the words of Nietzsche, we've killed God. I could say from my position in Sydney, Australia, part of a very Christian community and Christian world in a Christian nation, potentially post-Christian nation and post-Christian world, that despite the trimmings and the trappings of religious faith and of Christianity in particular, we've largely killed God and etched his name, like we've done to many statues and many artworks of late, out of the record books, out of our social conscience, out of our language. We've left his name in swear words, and that's about it, really. And we've done that for various reasons. We've transcended beyond God. We don't need him anymore. He was a crutch of our younger years, and we know now, science has disproved him. No, these aren't things I believe, but these are definitely the consensus, I guess, of what most people would feel. And whether you agree or disagree with those thoughts, I'm sure you've interfaced with those ideas and potentially consider them yourself. So why would we still use this framework of a God, a loving God, potentially a father God, for our children, for raising our children? So the thought is such that I've been researching Dan Siegel recently. He's an incredible author who's a neuroscientist and an educator. And he's playing a very pivotal role in bringing the depths of neurobiology, of current neurobiology, into the classroom, for the parents, for coaches, for any sort of professional who's working, interfacing with individuals. His attempt is to equip us with tools. I'm a coach, I'm a financial advisor. Equip me with tools so that I can interface with my clients in a way that is transformational and the most effective, grounded in science, grounded in principles that really work. And he does a wonderful job. He's been doing it for a long time. He's created a whole new field called interpersonal neurobiology, which is something I've been learning about, and something I aspire to subscribe to, actually. I think there's a great set of tools available there. It's a wonderful community. Now, Dan's newest book, Intraconnection, is really pivotal because he identifies that there's way too much me, not enough we, that we're over-accentuated the self. In many ways, our Western society, or you could say our modern society, has overemphasized the significance of self-healing, self-care, self-identity, self-respect. We definitely care for others, and we have a role for others, and we're trying to make a change in the world. But there's this conception that the self is preeminent, and I'm not here to debate that. But what I would suggest is, in line with his work and his book, we've over-accentuated the self and not the other tribe, or accentuated the me and not the we. And he suggests MWE, MWE, as like the me plus the we. And he's not trying to delete one or over-accentuate the other. He's just trying to help balance the equation. Now, why God? I'm going to take an agnostic view for the sake of this idea. Even in an agnostic perception of the world, our children need to know that they're connected to others. They need to know that they have a responsibility to play in the world. And there's not been a better framework presented to us. I don't think there's a better working framework for that other than the notion that they're a child of God. And as a result of that, they're siblings to all humankind. We're all one family. And as a result of that, we're stewards, gifted as the children of God to rule as heirs over his creation, which is his property, which we love, respect, honor, and value. And that conception, outlandish as it might seem, is beautiful, simple, very comprehensible for a young mind, and in many ways, I would say equivalent, if not accurate, to what is the case in our lives. And what we've done largely in our modern society is we've taken this conceptualization of us as a self, us as a child of God, which was very impregnated into all of the statutes of our law, common law system, all of our social institutions, and our social consciousness, that we're all children of God, that we're all brothers and sisters, I'm not saying it was perfectly applied, obviously. There's been definitely conceptions where we are the children of God and you're not. You're outside of the church, or you're outside of our demographic, or you're outside of our race, and as a result, we'll ostracize you and we'll treat you as not the children of God, which I don't believe is what the actual Christian faith stipulates, but it is what's been practiced in some cases. And there's a lot of reason for concern about the implementation of that framework. But if you genuinely accept that all humankind, at minimum, is part of the family God, and that we are all therefore stewards of his kingdom over his creatures, all creatures, his creation, then you have this natural intraconnection, not just with other cells, because that would be interconnection between separate entities. That's interconnection. Intraconnection is between an existing cohesive structure. What is the cohesive structure? It's the kingdom of God. It's all things as a kingdom. We are a part of the kingdom, like Paul says in the New Testament, we're parts of the body. And this conception that we're part of something greater and that our identity is foremost as a child of God. It's not foremost as a self. The self is an extension of the fact that we're a child created in his likeness. But at its core is that we belong to him and that he is our Father. Therefore, everything that we do is seen through this lens of, you are me, you're in my family. This tree is me, it's part of my kingdom. Now, when you have that conception well built, people are loving, people are compassionate, people listen, people care. People don't just have their solitary track, and people are not lonely. You cannot be lonely in that conception. You can be overcrowded, you can feel suffocated, but you're never lonely. That's one significant transition, or distinction, I should say. Now, what we've done is, by deleting God, we've kept the conceptualization of self, which is a byproduct of our nature as children. But then we've got rid of the Creator. We've got rid of Father. So we're now orphans. We're now independent children with no heritage, with no narrative. And we're not connected to society. We're not brought into the fold. We're not connected to one another. We're kids at an orphanage, bonded merely by our situation, by the context that we find ourselves in. And what a sad plight we have. And so my suggestion for you as a parent is, as you reflect on this, to think, what framework do I have in my mind that helps me feel part of the global tribe, that helps this earth seem to be my responsibility, that means that someone's pain is my own pain? And we don't want to jump to an extreme where we don't exist. We want to have a strong conceptualization of ourselves, but also one that enables and compels us to be intra-connected, not just interconnected. And if you have a faith of your own or a framework of your own that works for you, I'd encourage you to develop it, to refine your knowledge of it, and then to find ways to boil it down to something comprehensible by our kids. My 4-year-old daughter is not going to understand a neuroscientific description of why we're interconnected. I can point to a beehive and I can explain to her how bees operate, or ants for that matter, and I can help her recognize that the individual bee is an integral part of the whole, and that bee doesn't really exist by itself. It only exists because of the hive, and the hive only exists because of the bee. And maybe she'll grasp half of it, and maybe she'll get excited about it. You know what she'll do? She'll want to buzz around and pretend to be yellow and black. She'll gravitate to the things that interest her, and she's going to have a limited conception. But you know what will resonate strongly with her is the idea that she's my daughter, and because she's my daughter and I'm her father, that we're family, and that she belongs, and that her little sister, who's also my daughter, is therefore part of her. and that they have a bond and a responsibility to one another, and that our land, our home, our possessions are hers, and she has rights to them. But they're not solitary rights. She's not the only one that has rights, and there's responsibilities that go with those rights. And I would suggest that this idea, this notion of family, which is the foundational imprint of how we see the world, is the foundational imprint of how we grow and are raised in this society, in fact in all societies, is actually the best template or framework for how we can conceptualize the whole earth as a united whole. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If that idea resonates for you, let me know. If you don't have a faith and yet you feel like what I said makes sense, let me know your thoughts. Where does that challenge you? Where does that innerve you? What interests you and insights, especially as well if you have found antagonism towards faith in the past. What does this idea of us being a family look like, feel like to you? I'm really interested to know. Share your comments and thoughts. And finally, if you actually have a faith and you're reticent to share it with your children for whatever reason, potentially you're finding yourself becoming post-Christian in your own conception and worldview, or you're finding yourself jaded from elements of your more legalistic or religious faith, and you're wary of sharing them with your child, I'd love to know, what does this bring up for you? This idea that you can introduce them to God's family, to the family that you're part of, where you're peers with one another under a loving creator God who has the best in store for them. We want the best for our kids, we want the best for one another, and I want the best for you. So let me know how I can help you. I send you all my love. Speak soon.